Welcome, everyone. This is our inaugural first episode of Forensic Scenes. This is our brand new Forensic Scenes show. We are presented by the University of Florida, the Maple Center at the University of Florida. And I'm your host, Susan Undercuffler. I am the program director of the Wildlife Forensic Science and Conservation program here at University of Florida. And I am sort of the co-conspirator of the show, if you will, and our editor and co-conspirator along with me is Todd Weisfeld. And I am so excited for our inaugural show because we have one of the most fascinating guests we could ever ask. We are very privileged to welcome Ken Goddard. Ken is the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Forensics Lab out in Ashland, Oregon. And for probably the four people who don't know who Ken Goddard is, I will have him introduce himself because he does a much better job of talking about his life and his fascinating history than I could ever do. But viewers, you are watching Forensic Scenes. This is our brand new talk show that takes you kind of behind the scenes of all the diverse fields of forensic science and the professionals that work within them. And the show is broadcast to your desktop and mobile devices right here on our YouTube channel. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome our guest this evening, Ken Goddard.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for allowing me to be on your show.
Ken is coming to us all the way from Ashland, Oregon, from the Wildlife Forensics Lab, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Forensics Lab out there. And he has an absolutely fantastic background, and it's fascinating. And like I said, for those of you who don't know who Ken Goddard is, for the four people who don't, he is also a born storyteller. So we may or may not stick to the script this week, but I can assure you that it will be a fascinating show. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you so much. And I should warn the audience, Susan and I tend to get each other laughing, so we'll have to see how this goes.
We'll try to behave. But I wanted to start out with our theme for this month is wildlife forensic science. And so as the director of pretty much the world's only completely comprehensive forensics lab that's dedicated to wildlife, how would you define wildlife forensic science?
Sure. Wildlife forensic science is simply the application of basic forensic science principles to wildlife crime scenes and the related evidence. Very simply, all crime labs do pretty much the same thing, police or wildlife. They examine and compare evidence, and then in a triangular fashion, they attempt to link suspect, victim, and crime scene together. Well, in a wildlife crime lab case, we have a problem in that before we can do any of that, we have to figure out what our victim is. And every now and then, occasionally, as of this week for us, we have to figure out what our suspect is. We have worked a small number, fortunately, of animal attacking human cases. Our earlier ones were grizzly bear against a human, which didn't go well for the human. And out here in Oregon, we've been assisting the wildlife officers dealing with a sad case where a woman was apparently hunted down and killed by a cougar.
Yes, I heard about that.
We have a cougar in our lab, and our job is to see if we can figure out if that is the suspect. And we will use standard techniques, DNA, saliva, trace evidence. We really go to the idea that's common for forensic science and CSI, which is it's virtually impossible for a suspect and victim to come into contact with each other, especially violently, without the transfer of physical evidence, trace evidence. And that's what we're going on.
Right. So it's very much similar to human forensics.
It's very similar. It's the same thing. It's in our case, we're usually have occasionally a human on one side, but generally our victim is any protected, endangered, threatened species. And because we're sadly the only such full service wildlife lab on the planet, we'd certainly like not to be. We're desperately hoping not to be down the road. We receive evidence potentially from the 182 countries that signed the CITES Treaty, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, which is a little bit overwhelming, which means we have to be prepared for creatures from all parts of the planet. coming into our
Wow.
laboratory, or more likely pieces, parts, and products from which we have to figure out what the victim is.
Right. Okay. So it's very much like human forensics. However, you're not just dealing with one species, you have multiple species.
Yes, a lot of it gets routine, I guess, in a sense. Classic example, I guess, is reptile leather used to make purses, shoes, boots, sea turtle, caiman crocodile, things like that. Occasionally, we get purses pretty much made out of the whole crocodile, which looks a little bizarre with the head hanging down. I've never really understood that as a fashion statement, but
No.
probably keeps pickpockets at bay a little bit. But our job is to figure out if we don't have all the species defining characteristics on that purse, boot, or shoe. We have to come up with new ways of identifying species. So a lot of our work involves research. How do we tell those boots were made from a caiman crocodile, and it turns out the belly scales are indicative?
Great. Okay. So I'm going to include in our show notes down below some of the other interviews that you have done, and there are multitudes of them. In fact, I first found out about you guys through, I think it was the NPR interview with you, and that was several years ago now.
You tracked me down through that, yes, and I
I
think
did.
your first question was that real?
And I will link to those below so we don't have to spend, because you've done so many interviews about the lab and you've talked a lot about how the lab began and whatnot. Can you give us just a brief summary of how this lab, because it is so unusual and it's fantastic, how the lab came to be?
Sure.
And then the other, people can go back and listen to some other interviews where it's a little bit more comprehensive. But how did this happen?
Well, it came about because of the Endangered Species Act in 1973, and as a part of that act being enacted, are the management agents of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service who did routine investigations on wildlife issues suddenly became special agents of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And among other things, they created a headquarters office back in Washington, D.C., with desk agents, one of whom was in charge of all endangered species issues. And that was Special Agent Terry Gross. Terry basically looked like a shaved bear. We called him the German tank driver because he looked and acted like one. Uh, his job, he figured out quickly, was to get evidence identified. So he went to the FBI lab saying, "Hi, we're kind of new here. How do we submit our evidence to you?" And once they stopped laughing, they said, "Well, you're not going to, because we can't work a deer case ahead of a terrorism case or all these other really serious things we do." Well, it didn't take Terry long to figure out that we needed our own crime lab because nobody else was going to do the work. That led to a whole series of events where I ended up being interviewed by Terry to see if this was not only doable, but where would we build it? And at the very last moment, because of a chiropractor, which would take us a long time to explain and probably doesn't sound believable, uh, we ended up in Ashland, Oregon. And it's been a lovely bit of serendipity because this is a beautiful little place, the Rogue Valley. If the scientists we want to hire care anything about the outdoors at all, swimming, fishing, hiking, boating, the arts, the Shakespearean theater, this is a place, and we'd be able to hire
Wow.
some top-notch people.
Fantastic.
Yes, I think so. And so that's why we're here. That's what set things into motion way back into 1986. They'd hired me in '79 to set this lab up in DC. It took, and I got back there. I wrote their crime scene manuals and evidence manuals, and said, "Well, okay, let's start building the lab." And that's when they said, "Well, we don't have any money for a lab. It's your job to lobby for it." I said, "Well, okay, how do I do that?" I said, "Well, that's what we need to talk to you about. It's actually illegal for a government employee to lobby Congress." So I had the immediate impression that a federal law enforcement agency had hired a police crime lab director to create a violation of federal law to create a federal crime lab. I've got a more nuanced view of the whole thing now, but yeah,
Yeah, hindsight.
hindsight is interesting. And it took us 7 years to get the money, during which time I functioned as a technical agent for our guys in the field. They gave me a badge, a gun. Maybe I put together a CSI kit, surveillance kit, everywhere where things were happening, including a rather interesting undercover investigation involving a gorilla. Would you like me to tell you about that?
Yes, please tell me about the gorilla.
Well, this is when we didn't have a lab where I was assisting the agents. And we had a fellow down in Florida, your neck of the woods, who was exporting primates out to varying places. And we were going to work undercover and take him down at the airport. Well, timing was unfortunate in the sense that by the time we were ready to make this happen, the primate he was going to be exporting out was a gorilla. And the idea was he'd have the gorilla in the cage, they'd taxi out to the end of the runway. Uh, then we'd somehow say, okay, hands up, you're under arrest, and haul him out and haul the gorilla out. And that didn't sound good. You could see things going wrong. So we put one of our agents into a gorilla suit. And it was okay gorilla suit, but wasn't that great a one. So they added gorilla poop into the cage to add to the ambiance of the whole thing. And the guy bought it. They loaded the gorilla up. He's snorting and whatever gorilla sounds they make. He was doing it and throwing some poop around, I believe. And
Yes.
yes, and so the pilot took off down to the end of the runway, stopped because we ordered the pilot to stop. At that point, the agent did what he planned to do, which was unlock the cage from the inside, walk down the hallway to tell the guy he was under arrest, but forgot to take his head off. Slapped his hand on the shoulder of the guy. The guy turned around and started screaming that the gorilla was loose. Well, how can you not be inspired by such things?
See, all of our viewers, did you have any clue that for those of you who want to be conservation officers, you might be wearing a gorilla suit someday?
It's within the grasp of possibility, and I strongly recommend thinking the whole thing out ahead of time.
Yes, you might want to second guess this career.
Yeah, or at least the gorilla poop part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
where were we? We were talking about something serious. I'm sure we were.
Yeah, I think we were. The lab.
The lab, yes. Okay, what do we do in the lab? Well, we have 5 areas of science: genetics, morphology, criminalistics, police forensic science, analytical chemistry, and pathology, determining cause of death. And that tends to be the central part of our lab in the sense that we would get animals in. Cougars, bears, wolves, eagles, other raptors to determine how and why they died. And our pathologist would do just like they do in a normal human autopsy, except it's a non-human animal, so it's called a necropsy.
Right.
X-ray the outside. We even have a CAT scan now, a brand new technology where we can scan the animal in the body bag. We don't even have to take it out. We can have our computers manipulate the 3-dimensional image and tell the computers and to turn anything metallic red, and there's the bullet path.
Oh, fantastic!
Yes, I mean, when I first set this up, we could barely spell DNA. My biochemistry degree from '68 was actually halfway modern. Now we're involved in genomics. Incredible technology, but probably the most difficult thing we still do is pattern recognition, and that's our morphology section. That's where we deal with hair, fur, feathers, claws, teeth, bones, and skulls, pieces, parts, and products of the animals, where we have to figure out, based on pattern recognition, what our victim is or was. And it's along the line that, if my daughter were to walk in now, I'd say, "Oh, hi, Michelle. Am I sure it's her?" "Yeah, of course I am. I've seen her from 100,000 views. I have all these images in my head." But if it's Cayman Croc walked in, aside from climbing on my desk, I wouldn't know what it was because I don't have all those images in my head. I'm not an expert in reptile physiology, morphology, and that's what we have to bring in aboard in this section. Are scientists who not only understand basic anatomy of these creatures, but the pieces and parts therein. It generally it takes from someone coming to us with a advanced degree, a master's or doctorate degree in this area of science. It usually takes 3 or 4 years before they're ready to work evidence. It's such a different area of science. So we're constantly needing to have a second generation coming forward.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and we were just able to hire just recently Dr. Pepper Trail, our amazing bird expert, uh, who's not only amazing because of his talents, but he will occasionally dress up in a Darwin suit and beard, and he will give us a lecture, not only uh, what Darwin would say, but in his accents. You're starting to get the idea that putting on suits is an interesting
Yes.
aspect of a forensic scientist. Yeah,
I'm seeing that as a job requirement.
apparently, well, and quite honestly, one thing we look at, we obviously look for expertise. But we really try to find people who don't take themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
We really don't need somebody dragging a pedestal along behind them to leap upon. Uh, we want a sense of humor. And that has turned out to be one of the most critical components of our laboratory, because we're taking on things that are so much bigger than we are. Every now and then we just have to stop and laugh at ourselves and say,
Yeah.
okay, all right, let's regroup. Let's try again. What is a Totoaba fish bladder again?
Well, that and the fact that the things that you work on a daily basis, I can imagine it gets very almost soul sucking after a while. It
It
gets
can,
depressing.
yeah.
So
And that, of
yeah,
course, that's one of the problems of being in police forensic science, especially for one of the homicide crime scene investigator or working with rape victims, and that does tear at your soul a bit. You really develop um, what amounts to armor plating around your brain. I remember my first crime scene, which was pretty horrific, and it was shocking. I hadn't planned to be doing this. In fact, I hadn't planned to be any kind of forensic scientist at all. What had happened is I talked this wonderful young Japanese American co-ed into getting married, which was one heck of a sales job on my part, because I was about to graduate biochemistry. I had no money, and I didn't really like biochemistry, so my prospects for making more money weren't great. I was going to need a job, and so I'm 3 weeks from graduation. We're going to get married right after I graduate, and I'm working out judo to try and make myself feel better. And good old serendipity, I got hurt in the match, dislocated my shoulder, and the instructor taking me to the hospital happened to be a patrol sergeant on the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. He knew about Gina, knew I needed a job, and on the way there, he said, "Hey, did you ever think about being a cop?" And I think I said something to the effect, "God, no, I can't even win a fair fight. What are you talking about?" He said, "No, this is science. This is forensic CSI right down your alley, but you're going to need to be a deputy sheriff, to do the job." And oh, well, they took me to the hospital, put my shoulder back together. He took me to meet the sheriff, who it turned out later recognized my name for reasons I'll explain in a moment, unfortunately. Uh, Took me back to Gina, and she said, "Were you okay?" And my arms in a sling, and I'm glassy-eyed from the drugs. I said, "Yeah, but I think I'm gonna be a cop." It's not what she was expecting, but as it turned out, I was not going to be a deputy sheriff quite then, because they had to do a little background investigation. It turned out that the Riverside County Sheriff's Department had been investigating drug sales on the University of California campus, especially amongst the dorms. One of my two jobs was RA. I was a resident advisor for a dorm. It was my hall that the drugs were being sold
oh
on.
no.
The kids had figured out what time I was allowed to leave to go see Gina, which is when the girls and the drugs came in. And the Matheny, the sergeant, got back to the sheriff. He said, "Does Goddard know about this?" He said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "Well, find the narc. Find out what's going on here. Does he know about it? Is he a part of it?" And Matheny finally found the narc, and he said, "Goddard? Who, the RA? Oh God, no. He hasn't a clue what's going on in his dorm. He's in love with this beautiful little Asian chick. He wouldn't recognize crime if he tripped over it." So based on that shining recommendation from the narc, I'm what I what 2 weeks later, I graduate. She and I get married. I gingerly raise my right hand. I'm a deputy sheriff.
Wow.
Yes. Otherwise, had that not all happened, we wouldn't be talking here.
Oh my god. Thank goodness for the drugs in the dorm.
Yeah, and the gorilla suits and all the things that have just set things into motion. I mean, this is part of how I found my life fascinating, and there's so much serendipity involved. Looking back, had I gone left instead of right, well, had I not met you out there at that conference, that would realize what you were doing out in Botswana. I mean, there's all these possibilities that just, well, enthrall what you're doing. I'm
Yes.
enjoying myself.
Yes.
I don't retire. It's too good of a job.
Oh, you're not allowed to retire.
Well, I'm trying not to because I end up being my wife's garden slave, and I desperately trying not to do that.
Um,
Well, we're supposed to be on regular topics, aren't we? What are
yes,
we doing here?
I suppose we are.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the lab and we were talking about the scientists and all the skills that they need and
Mhm.
what does a typical day at
Uh-huh.
that lab look like?
Okay. Well, the typical day starts out. If it's a Monday, we bring everybody together for lab meeting. Say, okay, here's what's going on this week. Here's what we've heard from the Washington office. Here's what we think is heading our way. And but don't worry about that because you got 3 or 4 weeks of evidence all backed up that you got to be working on. So go do it. And so the scientists go to their sections and get to work on what they got in the weeks before. In the meantime, FedEx, UPS, the post office are heading our way with boxes, crates of stuff.
Deliveries.
Yes, and most of the time we know about it. Every now and then we don't. We got a skull in from Africa. We were not expecting. Well, we got a box in for Africa, which we were not expecting. They
Oh,
ran through
wow.
X-ray because we have people that don't like us, so we're not sure about what we're getting. We'll X-ray the package, and here appears to
Good
be
idea.
a primate skull from Africa. This was during the time the Ebola scare was going
Oh,
on.
no.
Yes, well, there was nothing telling us what this was or who it was from or what was going on. Um, so I was back in DC at the time talking with them, and our pathologists knew what to do. The first thing they did is expose the box to a shortwave UV light in our safety hood in our bio level. We have a biosafety level 3 isolation ward to deal with disease vectors, which we hope we don't have to, but occasionally might. So 24-hour exposure to the outside of the box. Everybody had handled the box, but we were still going to keep ourselves safe. We then put it in our autoclave, basically a pressure cooker, one cycle. They thought about it, sent it through a second time, and then, bless paranoia for what it is, our evidence sec said, no, we're not done. They punched a hole in the box and filled it with bleach. Uh, that kills everything. Nothing, anything survives that, we run. We set the lab on fire and go. Uh, and it turned out to be a primate skull that one of our agents had heard about on eBay or whatever it was, eBay, and arranged to have sent to us without mentioning it to us. And it was from Cameroon where there's no Ebola going on. So life was better.
Oh my God.
So to answer your question, our average day can get exciting. It's really it's Christmas every day. It's just you don't know what's in those packages necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So it can be exciting, but it's fascinating work. I mean, to try to these wildlife investigators are just heroes, and one of the really things I love getting to do, in addition to all this type of work, we travel to places like Africa to train African rangers how to work elephant rhino kill sites as homicide crime scenes. And that's where you and I go to the same place. We have 3 attaché senior special agent locations in 3 embassies in West, East, and South Africa. It was uh, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Gaborone, Botswana, and Gabon, I think is the third. They may be moving about, but that's where they were. And the idea is that these 3 senior attaché agents will arrange for training for the rangers in the countries around their area of responsibility. We'll fly out there. We'll spend 2 weeks training typically 30 to 40 rangers on how to work wildlife crime scenes. They're really heroic people. I mean, they're
Yeah,
out
they
there
are.
by themselves facing armed militants armed with assault rifles, with just themselves, maybe a poorly working vehicle and a not well working at all radio, and their nearest backup is probably hours away
Yeah.
because they have hundreds of miles to patrol. And by the way, about a quarter of these rangers are women. Some of the toughest women
Yes.
I've ever met in my life.
Yep.
So it's just fascinating to see and to be a part of all that. And oh, I should tell you another story. We're
Okay.
talking to rangers about humor and how humor is essential. And part of this, we're trying to get them to relax amongst us because they were being very polite to us, sir, this. We thought, no, we're your buddies. We're gonna get down on our hands and knees with you. And I'm halfway through my lecture, and one of the rangers raised his hand. I said, "Yes, what's the question?" He says, "Mr. Ken, on our next raid, we want you to come with us." I said, "You do? You know I'm a scientist, crime scene investigator, yes?" He said, "Oh, yes, but your white hair, they'll shoot at you first." I reacted the same way you're reacting right now, which I just broke out laughing. And I said, "You know I'm not coming, right?" Once I finally was able to recover, he said, "Yes, Mr. Ken, we know, but a good joke, yes?"
Humor.
We felt we were successful, and in fact, it was one of our better instruction periods.
That's
Uh,
great.
yeah, it's a wonderful thing to do. I love this job, and you know why. You're out there doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's very rewarding, and I'm glad to see that it's becoming it's getting more press in the
Yes.
last few years, and that people are starting to become aware of the fact that these people, they really lack the basic skills, they lack the supplies, they're very limited in the technology that they have, and they're out there doing this, and they a lot of them they don't carry assault weapons, and
No,
they
they're lucky to have a rifle
right.
and training.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think for the first trip I made out there, I was talking to some Kenyans. They were telling me the year before they had lost 10 Rangers that year.
Ugh.
Uh, it's a terribly dangerous job.
Yeah.
The people put themselves between the animals, or rhinos and the hippos, and these now militant poachers who are trying to use the horns and the tusks to fund their terrorist operations.
Yep.
That's the frustrating part.
It is. Yeah.
Oh, but would you like to hear another? You got to have a sense of why humor is crucial to this. I'm in Dar es Salaam, where we've had to have bodyguards for the first time on this trip, and I'm getting ready to go down. I'm going to leave the hotel, walk down the street, Dar es Salaam, to the ATM, a couple blocks away. And the bodyguard said, "Sir, where are you going?" I said, "I'm just going down to the ATM." He said, "Yes, you know you're in Africa, right, sir?" I said, "Yes." I had been limping around. I twisted my back. He said, "Sir, in Africa, old, slow, and limping is a very bad look."
It is.
It is, yes, the wild, or apparently the streets of Dar es Salaam. I said, "So you're going with me, right?" He said, "Yes, sir. Of course I am." It's
That
educational. It's
yes,
constantly educational,
and
and
that will give our viewers some type of visualization of what it's like there.
yeah. I don't lack inspiration to write my crazy stories, as you probably have guessed by
No.
now. It's fascinating work. The people doing this work, especially in the field, are very heroic. We're trying to work with wildlife investigators all over the world. We meet fascinating people,
Mhm.
and we're constantly given professional challenges to figure out the science. I mean, what more could you ask for?
Exactly. So we're telling all these stories, and I need to tell our viewers too that Ken Goddard is a born storyteller, and I think it was we were was it Montana? I think it was Montana.
Oh,
And
yes, yes,
yes,
yes.
we were sitting in the airport, and I think we both were waiting for some ridiculous long time. And I have never been so entertained in an airport for 5 hours in my life.
Susan is
And
very easy to get laughing, I might tell you, audience out there. I'm not sure she's a classic forensic science professor, but she's a lot of fun to be around. And I understand she's going to be trying to encourage you to get in forensic science as a profession. And
yes,
I heartily cheer that on. Now,
good.
wildlife forensics is a little trickier, sadly, because there's so few jobs available.
Yeah.
Right now, as we had said earlier in the program, our lab is the only full service wildlife crime lab out there. We're hoping other countries will step forward and create similar labs. And right now, there's a few of our states that have one or two people, doing mostly genetics type work. We're
Yeah.
trying to talk all of our 50 state police crime labs to include a wildlife section within their police forensic science. That would
Oh,
make
that'd
the
be
most sense to
perfect.
us. I think so. We would share everything we've got, all of our protocols and procedures. We are an accredited crime lab.
Mhm.
We don't fit, as you might imagine, the standards. Um, our application was 4,000 pages. It took us 2
Wow.
years. We're ISO accredited, which means we have to meet ISO international standards. And it basically means all of our protocols and procedures have to link back to the standard international meter, the standard international liter, the standard international gram. Well, they're investigating, checking out our laboratory, and one of them looks to us and said, "Well, where's your standard international wolf?" And I just stared at him. I said, "There's no thing." He said, "But there has to be." I said, "Well, all right. Good luck with that." I mean, it's like humans. There's no standard human. We're a bell
No.
curve of characteristics. And which reminds me, we got to work a werewolf case.
Oh, yes, you have to tell people about this. I'm
Yeah,
sure people have seen this in the news. This was
yeah.
fairly recent,
It
and
was fairly recent,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's translation of words. It's the old author problem. If you're going to say something looks like a weird wolf, you need to pronounce that carefully. But this fellow shot what he thought was a very weird looking wolf. And the closer he got to it, the weirder he thought it was. The paws were small, the teeth were wrong, it was scrawny. Uh, and somehow, I think he called himself in. Then some investigators said, "Well, we're going to send this to the forensics lab in Ashland," which translated to, "Well, we've already sent it there." And I'm getting phone calls from as far away as Romania,
Oh.
Transylvania, saying, "You have a werewolf. We hear you have a werewolf." I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." They finally they decided they weren't going to send the wolf to us, but they'd send us tissue, and we're as curious as anybody else. We everybody assumes we have Sasquatch evidence in the lab. We don't. My granddaughter doesn't believe me, but we honest to God we don't. Uh, but we ran our DNA test to see if this had wolfness or dogness associated with it, because it didn't look like much like a wolf.
Yeah.
And the 10 areas of the genome we looked at for wolfness or dogness all said wolf. And we made a mistake. We went back and reran it 5 more locations. All 15 showed wolfness.
Oh,
We thought,
wow.
what does that? Well, and talking it over, we really figured out it's the same bell curve issue. For us guys, there's a bell curve of characteristics. Arnold Schwarzenegger at one end, and 93-pound weakling at the other, whatever your imagination puts it, and the rest of us ideally somewhere in the middle. Well, that was the case with this poor critter. He was a wolf, but he was in no condition to compete for a female mate. He was at the other end of the spectrum. He was going to be lucky to compete for a poodle,
Oh,
and that
wow.
may have been what he was doing out there when he got shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was able to call the reporter back in Romania and say, "Sorry, ma'am, I know you were hoping. It was just a weird wolf, not a werewolf."
Yeah, it was, I think when that story came out, it was a month or 2 ago, and everybody was following along on a daily basis to see how far you guys had gotten with it because the stories were just getting crazier and crazier.
You can imagine the phone calls, and we keep telling them, "Look, we're this is an investigation. We can't talk." And that just fueled the whole thing.
Yeah.
They've got a werewolf. We know it. They're hiding it away, probably with our ET evidence and the Sasquatch. So it could get interesting around here.
Yeah.
You have to come. You got to get out here.
I know, I
Yeah,
know.
bring
I
your
thought
camera.
I thought I was gonna make it out last May after our
Yeah,
conference, and I didn't, and I need to get out there, and
you do.
but if I come out there, I might not leave, just
Well,
warning.
that's okay. We have a desk, office, and there's stuff you can do. Yes,
Yay!
yay! But very seriously, bring a camera. I would love to have you interview some of our scientists.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, Especially, we just have some fascinating people.
Yes.
Uh, uh, Diane, our DNA expert, who we call our Oregonian gal, because she is. She grew up hunting and fishing. She's so smart with the DNA, but that after hours, if she gets her elk tag, she's out there looking for her elk, and she's going to field dress it, drag it back to her ATV, and cut up elk steaks.
You go, girl.
Yes, I love this job. How can I not?
I have been very privileged to meet some of the scientists that work out there, and they are just a great group of people, and the work
Yeah,
that you guys do is I can't I cannot stress enough how fascinating a career field this is. And it's only it's only going to expand. I mean, it's
It,
not,
it-
there's now, because new rules and regulations are being passed, new laws are being passed. We have a very interesting political climate at the moment. And, this is,
which
this is
we
a,
have to ignore.
yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
our
pretty
job is to
much.
ignore politics. We just do our job,
Yeah,
our job really make sure everybody understands it out there, especially the young students who are thinking about this. We don't take sides. We
yeah,
don't take sides for prosecution or defense.
yep,
Our job is to speak for the evidence, and that's all we will do. When we go send our scientists to court, they're told work with both sides, talk openly, don't play games. When you're up on the stand, answer every question as openly and clearly as you can. When the judge dismisses you, shake hands, go back, check out your hotel, fly back home, go back to work the next morning, start on your next case, and most importantly, never call to find out how the case went.
yeah,
In our point of view, mine specifically, a gold star on the wall is a successful presentation, not a successful prosecution.
right,
And that's something I hope everyone out there, you young forensic science students especially, the ethics of this profession are crucial. It will be up to you to maintain them.
right, exactly. I'm always warning students to be careful what you put out there about yourself and watch your Facebook profiles, and because all of that can be courtroom fodder for
Yeah.
attorneys.
Yeah.
And
Are you
yeah,
biased or are you not? Are you
right,
really unbiased? Well, let's look at your Facebook page. Oh,
exactly,
wow. Yes.
exactly.
Be thoughtful, please.
So for our curious students out there, or people who are just in general wondering what would help them
Mhm.
be wildlife forensic scientists, or
Uh-huh.
what should they do, because it's not a career that you can just go on monster.com or indeed.com and find a job listing for wildlife forensic scientist.
Yeah.
What would it be better for students to specialize in something like morphology, like genetics, if they're thinking of applying it to wildlife? How would it work?
Sure. And the answer is exactly that.
Okay.
You go towards a specialization, just at least to a certain degree. In biology, mammals, birds, reptiles, it's handy if you specialize because there's so much you're going to have to know in each of those subfields.
Yeah.
Uh, with chemistry and genetics, not so much because you're going to learn the basic techniques, and we're getting we're genomics. You'll bring the necessary technology and knowledge with you. We're not going to have to do much training, and same with veterinary pathology, determining cause of death. That's straightforward, and so is criminalistics. But it's really the morphology section, the mammals, birds, reptiles, which if that's something that interests you, and I hope there's a bunch of people out there that are interested in that because it's such a crucial aspect of our work. You need a general degree. Get a good general biology degree, strongest you can. But at that point, I'd strongly suggest a master's degree towards more specialization.
Okay.
Because I'm sure down the road in these next few years, it won't be just us looking for another generation of morphologists, but I'm hoping our state police crime labs, their wildlife sections, will be looking for morphologists. And
Yes.
our sense is other countries are working their way towards labs of this type. They're going to have to if we're going to protect our wildlife.
Yes.
We
Agreed.
don't, they're doomed.
Yeah. So, are there any cases, either as in during your time with the lab or during your time before the lab when you were doing crime scene? Are there any cases that sort of haunt you, or wish that you had gone you know what? I have a feeling I'm setting myself up here.
Yeah, yes, you are. And yes, there's one specific one that haunts me for any number of reasons. It was a fellow, bad guy, who was burying bodies out in the desert in the crawl spaces of old homes. And we'd found a couple. And we had word that this fellow had lived in this old decrepit house with the sagging floors. And we got out there. I was with three homicide detectives. I was a deputy sheriff. I'm supposedly the fourth of them, but they're serious tough guys. And I'm the skinny scientist with glasses with a badge and gun. And we're looking around, and here's the crawl space, and it was a really small crawl space. We're looking in, and imagine the space between the floor, the ground, which was cross-laid with strips of concrete, but only about 8 inches between that and the sagging floor, and about 50 years worth of cobwebs and
Ah,
insects. And you can see where somebody had pulled themselves through there. The concrete formed, like little shallow pools, maybe 6 inches deep, that they had to pull themselves over and kept going there. I remember looking in there thinking, God, I'm glad I'm not going in there. And so I'm laying out all my CSI gear and all that, and the homicide sergeant said, "Hey, Goddard, come over here." I said, "Yeah." He said, You're gonna have to go in there." I
No.
think at that point I started stammering frantically. I said, Why me?" He said, "Because we don't fit." Well, two of them was because of their shoulders, one because of his gut. I said, "Well, there's going to be other skinny deputies out there." They said, "Close by." They said, "Yeah, there is." They pointed to me.
Oh no.
A couple of minutes later, I'm halfway through the hole. I have a gun in one hand, my revolver, a flashlight in the other. I'm scared out of my mind. I'm pulling myself all the way through, little thing by little thing. And very helpfully they said, "Hey, don't forget he could still be in there." I said, "Yes,
Oh
thank you,
jeez.
thank you." Working my way back. I thought took about 5 hours to get there. It's probably only 15, 20 minutes. I'm at the far corner of this crawl space, and over to the left, going the other way into the darkness, because all I've got is my flashlight.
Oh,
I'm covered with layers upon layers of cobwebs and flies and stuff. I can see where something had been dug up and dragged that way. I thought, "Oh, Lord, I've got to go that way too." I'm looking around, and as I'm looking around, and I can't move much because there's nails through the floor, and I don't want to stab myself in the head. I look at my flashlight, and a big spider is crawling up my knee.
that's it. I quit.
I almost shot it. Yeah, I mean, it was my first instinct: shoot the damn thing. Fortunately, I didn't. One, I'd have blown my kneecap off. Two, I'd have taken out my eardrums. And three, the homicide guys probably would have started shooting at me, thinking logically it was the bad guy doing the shooting as opposed to their scientist. I was down there for about 2 hours. We never found the guy.
Oh no.
So yes, does that case haunt me? Yes, it
So
does.
he's still out there.
I hope he's long. I hope he. I never know what I hope. It's not nice, but I got this all out of my system in a story called Cheater. I don't recommend you read that because I have one interesting crawl space scene in
All right, that's a perfect segue. So,
it.
because and I wish I could say this for all authors, but there are some authors out there that are not, their writing is fantastic, but they're not the best storytellers. Well,
Well,
I
some of
can
the authors, we're supposed to be hidden away, probably locked into our
exactly.
rooms. Sure,
Yeah,
and
in a little closet,
understandably,
not out
yeah.
there in the public. Yeah, but Ken Goddard is definitely a storyteller, both orally and on paper. So if you get a chance, you have to go to Amazon.com. You can go to his website. I'll post it down below, and check out his books. So you are a fiction writer. Tell us about your books, and I
Well,
can I can recommend them personally.
thank you. Yeah, you're kind. As I said, you're easily entertained by well, not apparently by spiders, but I've got other things waiting for you. I always wanted to write as a kid, and I tried, and nothing ever worked. I did Frog and the Princess stories for my sister. She loved them, and I even talked my wife into getting married. I think with the Frog and Princess stories. I think she fell for it, but. I'm there, brand new deputy sheriff, about to be. I still got to go through training at the academy, and I see two grizzled old sergeant deputies, trainers over there knitting. Uh, what are they doing? And looking back, they probably would do that just so young would-be deputies would walk over there and say, "What are you doing?" They'd beat the crap
Exactly.
out of them. But they looked at, "Oh, you're that forensics kid. Here, sit down. We want to talk to you." And the essence of the conversation was, if I wanted to stay married to this beautiful young woman I talked into getting married, which I did, they said, if you want to stay out of bars, not have girlfriends or boyfriends, you need to come home to something creative. They're quite serious. Art, music, carpentry, something, instead of getting off shift and hanging out in a bar to commiserate what a lousy day it was with some of your fellow officers. Don't do that. That's how you end up with a bar girlfriends and boyfriends.
Mhm.
uh, Go home to that carpentry project, go home to that painting. Well, writing was it for me. writing the stories.
Ah.
And that it resulted in a book called Balefire. The idea that one terrorist could take on a 200-man Huntington Beach Police Department and win. I didn't find that believable. We were getting ready for the '84 Olympics when the chief, Robitel, got mad at us. He said, "You guys don't understand. This is back in '78, '79, way before the '84 Olympics, and we're south of LA. We're not where Olympics are going to take place." He said, "You guys just don't understand. One professional terrorist can take all 200 of us on and win." And all the lieutenants and captains are going, "Oh, yes, sir," saluting. And I'm going, "Huh?" I'm the scientist. I was the crime lab director. I was allowed a lot more latitude. He put up with me a lot more. And I went to his office. I said, "Sir, I'm sorry. I just don't understand. Huntington Beach is a good police department. We had very few badge heavy officers, thugs, really professional police department. And I couldn't see any terrorists, whatever that might be, taking on two of them,
Yeah.
much less 200. That was nonsense." Well, he gave me stuff to read, to Che Guevara, and a bunch of things to take home. And I came back the next Monday, like, "Oh, okay, this is scary." But I said, "Well," I said, "Well, how does he get to us? I don't understand. We're in a brand new police building. It's pretty much an armored castle. Police officers, on duty, injured,
Yeah.
are they're at the front desk, armed to the teeth. How?" So I'm saying, and he said, "Okay, that's fair. Give me your badge. Give me your credentials." I did. He said, "Okay, you have no law enforcement authority whatsoever. You're not a government employee here in the city. You're just a private citizen. Go out there and see what you can find." So I'm sitting there in my office thinking, "Well, what have I done?
Right.
this, this isn't good." And I look up, and here's the public tour coming through the police building. They don't come in the lab because we're secure. And oh, and I walked out there, and I joined the tour. And it's usually given by sergeants about ready to retire. They don't want them hurt.
Ah.
And Sergeant Crusenberry, crusty old character, looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm joining the tour. I've never been on it." And he told me later, he said, "Okay, you're losing it, Goddard, because we've been in the police building for 2 years. I didn't need a tour to know my way around the building." So he takes us through the building. We go down to command and control in the basement. We're one of the first police departments to have computers, locators, locating our cars. And the people are taking pictures down there. And there's the big Motorola a mainframe, and I'm writing down the number of all this. I'm stunned that pictures are being taken. He takes us
Yeah.
out to the back parking lot, starts opening up patrol cars, turning on the radios, turning on the computers. And yes, my look was pretty much, I'm sure, like your look, which is, what the hell is going on here?
Yes.
And he walked up to me. He said, "Would you like to sit in a police car, young man?" Sarcastic was dripping from him at this point. And I said, "Yeah, I would." At that point, he almost took me down because I wasn't armed, but I had a shotgun key on my key ring. There's a locked shotgun in that cruiser, and he thought I'd lost it. He thought I just
Oh.
completely lost it because I'd been in police cars several thousand times. I'm sitting there in that patrol unit, looking at it as the mind of my terrorist, Thanatos, thinking, "Well, oh my God, you can get everything."
Yes.
I followed 3 cops home. They never saw me. I called Motorola for whatever it was, $22,000 and something. I could get a small version of their computer, which would communicate with our cars if I knew the frequencies, which they weren't going to give me. And I talked to a friend of mine. He said, "Oh, you need frequencies?" I said, "Yeah, I think I would." I'm still thinking about this as a story. He called up his ham radio friend, wrote down some numbers, handed up. He said, "Here you go. It's public information." I went down to command and control. I didn't know that. And I said, "Are these our frequencies?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Aren't you wondering why I have them?" He said, "No." I went back to the chief, basically ready to ask when we're going to build our moat around, the police department.
Yeah.
And he said something very fateful. He says, "So tell me, Ken," as he's giving me my badge back. He said, "You want to live in a police state?" I said, "No." He said, "Precisely." He said, "I can set police state things into motion here to protect our officers, but they'll be heavy-handed against the citizens. It won't be nice car stops. It'll be, out of the car, ma'am. I don't care about your kids," type of car stops.
Yeah.
Yeah, turn the citizens, the cops against each other. He said, that's not going to happen. He said, which means if we ever had a terrorist going after us, we'd lose officers. The first officers wouldn't stand a chance. It was the shark theme I later figured out. If you see a shark coming at you offshore, where I used to body surf and worried about sharks, you see that dorsal fin, you're in trouble, but you can do stuff. One, you can go get back to shore if you got time, or you can fight it off, or you can go down and hold your breath and act like a rock, but you can do stuff. If it comes at you from below the surface, you don't know what's coming. You don't stand a chance.
Yeah.
Well, that was Thanatos. Uh, the story stuck in my mind. I finally wrote the story and I sold it to Bantam, and I'm on the New York Times bestseller list. And I've got a book that came out right. The paperback version came out right as the '84 Olympics were going on how to take apart Huntington Beach as a
Oh.
demonstration against the '84 Olympics. I uh, Robitel assured me it was fine. He said, "Don't worry about it. You couldn't imagine anything that these guys can't imagine. You're warning the public. That's fine." But I didn't sleep well until the Olympics were over.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
There's a drawback to having something creative to go home to. This for you young scientists, potential police officers, whatever you're going to do out there. It's a fascinating job. I mean, I heartily recommend it, from the police activities to the game warden activities to the forensic scientists. But it's going to get your soul a little bit
Yeah.
for all kinds of reasons. You're going to need that sense of humor, and my friend Susan will show you how to maintain that.
I can certainly try in my
I,
classes. I can certainly try.
I'm sure you will.
Well, so if people are interested in learning more about the lab, how can they do that?
We have a website, which I believe hopefully you're going to post. It's
Yes, I will.
www.lab.fws.gov. We've got a lot of information on there, including a webinar. I had no idea what a webinar was. I still require my granddaughter to help me with an iPhone. So, I'm a 60s kid. I'm having trouble adjusting to these new ages. Uh, but Danielle Brigida was hired, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as our social media manager. Her first job was to come down to our lab and conduct a webinar, wandering through our laboratory with a camera, interviewing everybody. Not only did that webinar win her an international award, it's posted on our website.
Yeah, go check it out.
Please do. It will give you a sense of who and what we are, and possibly who and what you can become.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And go check out his books. If people want to find your books, can they go to Amazon, or do you have a website?
I have a website, but yeah, I do have a website, www.kengoddardbooks.com. I'll give it to you. That has sample chapters in there. So if you have a thing about spiders, you might want to skip that particular book. My good guys have as much bad time as my bad guys. My cops are a little skeptical about all that, my cop buddies, but I try to write them real. I
Yeah,
try to give a sense of what it's like to be scared.
they are.
Uh,
They are very real. They're fun.
I hope I entertain. Um,
How many
I
books do you have now? How many have you written?
I've written 11. The last
Okay.
one, Chimera, on well, I wouldn't want to tell much of the story other than genetics is involved.
Ooh.
Ooh, and something out of the past.
Hmm.
I had great fun, and when I get back to writing, I'm going to continue on that theme. It's a fascinating area to explore. You don't know,
Excellent.
you don't want geneticists doing too much manipulation of DNA.
No.
You don't want somebody coming up with a 3-foot diameter black widow spider, for example.
No. No. Just imagining the ones in that crawl space are enough.
That was fine. Yes, and it wasn't even a black widow. It was just big. Poor thing.
Spiders are
Yeah,
fine as long as they're away from me.
yeah. Uh-huh. She's not going into the crawl space with me. I can tell.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Uh,
Well, Ken, thank you so much for your time. I really can't thank you enough for
I This
spending
is so
some
much
time with
talking with you.
us.
If they can enjoy our conversations, this is the kind of conversation we had at the airport, by the
It
way.
really is. This is
We get
every time we get together, I think. We never stick to a topic.
it's kind of tough to do.
No, yeah, it is. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And for all of our viewers, I hope you appreciated our show. And stick with us because next month we will have a new theme and a new full-length show for you. But thank you very much, Ken Goddard, for taking your time and sharing a little bit about the lab and your life and what our students, our student viewers can do if they are interested in this field. And I can vouch for the fact that it is a fascinating field. It's a lot of fun.
Very happy to do so, and I wish them all well.
All righty. Take care, okay?
I will.
Thank you very much.